Hey guys, welcome back. This is the first video for the rest of the semester, and I want to catch us up on where we left off and then where we're going to go from here. I've uploaded a Unity package onto Canvas, and it should be directly above this particular video. If you're on the Canvas page right now, I want you to take a second to download that package and either create a new project and incorporate that package, or just uh, import it into your current project. I want to show you around where we left off, and I want to talk about something really important called namespaces, and that's going to solve some problems about you having some scripts that might have the same name as the stuff that I'm going to be giving you guys. So why don't we just dive right into that? After you've imported it into Unity, it should look something like this. And there's in the assets folder, let's concentrate on that for a second. There's going to be different folders that I've already created, and I've just sort of cleaned it up from what we left off when we were in person in class. And there's 5 main folders at the moment. First and foremost is the scenes folder, and I have the basic platformer scene and a space scene. Before we get into Unity's UI system, I just want to talk about what we have so far, and if you want to incorporate some of the scripts that I have here into your personal project, which is totally fine. I want us to start out with the best start possible, and that's going to reduce the number of questions and confusion before we start moving on. And the next thing that we want to talk about is the scripts. Let's just peek into some scripts that we have for our 2D platformer. I have my main character, and of course they may look different than your main character. And I have a couple scripts that are governing the behavior of my main character. I have my Skelly character, and you can see that there's a basic movement platform script, a jump demo script, and a shoot projectile script. And each of these have different setups where I've set up some buttons for it to shoot. In fact, I actually don't need a shoot button for this one because the shooting actually happens down here in my shoot projectile script. And basic movement just allows my character to move left and right, and the jump demo script is the one that actually controls my character to move, to jump. So I have my character, and it's looking left and right, it's idling, and that's one of the last things that we talked about. And if I push left or right, then it plays a little animation, and if I press spacebar, my character jumps. Again, if we break this all down, the basic movement platform script controls a character for a 2D platformer or a side-scrolling game. We can just eliminate the shoot button. We don't need that in the script because we have shoot in another script. And so all of this stuff near the top should be pretty familiar to you. We have a facing right Boolean variable that lets us know that we should set whether our character naturally looks right or looks left. And we can set that in the inspector. Right now it's set to true. And let me just lock down this in the inspector and jump back into Visual Studio. Then we have our horizontal value, vertical value, the speed that we want our character to be moving at. We have a rigid body so that we can use physics to make our character move. We have an animator reference variable to allow us to talk to the animator to change from idle to walking to jumping. And then we have a couple reference variables that look at our spawn point, and that's where we're going to shoot our projectile, and this is where we're going to shoot what projectile we're actually going to be shooting from, the bullet prefab. At start, we grab the reference to our rigid body, and the function that we use is the Unity built-in get component, and then we're looking for the rigid body attached to our main character. And if we look over here, this is the rigid body, and we're telling the script to go find that rigid body and link it to this variable called RB. We're doing the same thing for the animator, and we have a variable called animator here, and we're telling the script to go look for the animator component, this one down here, this guy right here, and we're telling it to retrieve that animator and link it to this variable here. That allows us to call on native functions or attributes, parameters that are associated with the individual rigid bodies and animators. From there, we have an update function. If we just call in individual functions here, we have the check axes animate, and flip sprite. You'll notice that this position move is commented out. That means that while we're cycling through our update, we're not calling that function. Fixed update is where we have physics calls, and right now we're using the set velocity method. I have a comment here saying that we should use either the set velocity or move force to make our character move. You shouldn't have both of these because they are essentially making our character move, and if we have both of them set or active like this, then they're going to be overriding each other and our character is going to do something really weird. So I suggest you either pick one or the other. They do something sort of similar. One sets the velocity of our character, the other one adds a force as if something was pushing it along the way. I'm going to be using set velocity for our horizontal movement. In our animate function, which is called here in update, what this does is it takes our horizontal speed value and sends this over to our animator. And of course, we know that when our character is not moving, we don't want it to have a walking animation. And we're allowing the float value of our horizontal value variable to control our animator to say that if this value is greater than 0, then we're going to make our animator play our walking animation. Our check axes function basically is looking to see if we're pressing left or right, and then it's setting this horizontal value. And we later use this horizontal value for when we move, and also when we want to decide to flip our character or not. If we're moving to the right, then we want to make sure that our character is facing the right. And if we happen to be looking the wrong way, then we have this flip sprite function, which is called here. And it's getting called every single cycle, but it's checking to see if we happen to be moving left, but we're facing right. So if the condition here is if we happen to be moving to the left side, if our horizontal value is less than 0, and we happen to be looking right, then it's going to be looking as if we're going like this. And that seems kind of weird, right? And so if that's the case, and our character is moving to the left and facing right, we want to have the sprite flip itself or rotate. And what that does is we tell the transform to rotate 180 along the y-axis. And we have the converse over here. So if we happen to be moving in the positive direction and we happen to be facing left, then we have ourselves flip again. So this is just make sure that our character, when they're moving to the left or to the right, that the sprite is facing the appropriate direction. And if not, then we tell it to flip. And you can see that when I press to the right, our rotation is 0, 0, 0. And we know that if I'm moving to the opposite direction, we should be rotating along the y-axis 180 degrees. 180. And if we move back, then we're flipping back to 0. Move to the left, flipping 180. Cool. Moving right along, we have a couple of these functions that help us move. 3 functions below control our movement. We should only be calling one of these at any time. And so even though these are living here, these are not actually getting called unless we have them living either in fixed update or update. And we only have one, and that the only one that's alive is set velocity. If we decide to move force, then we would comment out set velocity here. But if we decide that we want to use position move, we could make that active. So there's 3 possible ways to do it. I'm using set velocity. They inherently do slightly different things, but only use one at any given time. Cool. Next thing that we have is the jump demo. And independent of moving left and right, we are using jump demo to use force to make our character jump. And if they're falling at a certain rate, sorry, I'm moving too fast. We have a lot of parameters, and we used our class time a few weeks before we left for coronavirus to work this all out. And we had a process of talking about what's important to know, what does Unity need to know, and how do we implement these important factors. And we said that we need to know what button we're going to press, how many possible jumps we could make, how much force we want to be applying when we jump, um, how fast we want to be falling, if we're falling down versus going up in our jump, whether or not we can jump, and is there a jump limit. So we're keeping track of how many jumps we have, and then we can't exceed our jump limit. Um, Further on from there, we have a rigid body reference, and we do the same thing about grabbing the rigid body and referring it back to our RB variable. And then right when our object enters the scene, we reset our number of jumps to 0. Just in case it accidentally was not a non-zero value, we make sure that it is when we start. At start we have, at update, we're checking to see if we press the jump button, and we can jump down to here to see what that logic looks like. We are checking to see if we press down on our jump button. And right now it's just called jump button because the reference of it is a key code data type. And we know that if we look at it in the inspector, we can use that key code to pick any possible keyboard button to be our jump button. In this case, I've selected space. Coming back here, if we press spacebar or our jump button, then we check to see if we can jump or if we have less than if we haven't exceeded the jump limit yet. If we can jump or if we have more jumps to jump, then we are able to jump. And when that happens is we set our relative velocity to 0, our vertical velocity to 0, you can see that here, ignoring our x velocity, and then we apply a force in the vertical axes. This first value is 0. We don't add a force in the horizontal space, but we add the jump force in the vertical space, and that's going to allow our character to move upward. And then we increase the number of jumps here. We don't need this thing here. We'll just eliminate that. Cool. And then the last two things are whether or not our character is standing on ground or not. We know that our character here has a collider at their foot, and this checks to see if this circle collider runs into any other object that's tagged ground. So if we go here and tag this to be ground and not character, then we should see that when our character falls into this space, the on ground variable should be checked. How come that on ground is not there? Oh, we have it set to can jump. So if we hit ground, then we have the ability to can jump. So let's just take this away real fast. If we're off the ground right now, our can jump is false. And let's just bring this up. And let's look at this spot right here after I hit play. You'll notice that this can jump gets activated. Boom. And if we leave the ground, then our can jump is to off. And if we haven't exceeded the number of jump limit yet, we can continue to jump, and you'll see that our num jump increases. And when we get to 3, we can't jump anymore. Great. And one last thing that we're going to be looking at is the shoot projectile script. And what that does is it takes in 3 variables, and let's look at the script first. It takes in a game object, which we will consider the projectile. This is the bullet or whatever projectile we want to be shooting. And then the shoot point is where in space do we want to be instantiating or spawning this projectile. And then which button we're going to be pressing. And so this shoot button is just like the other one that we set for our jump. It's basically a key code that allows us to select any number or any keyboard press. And in this case, I've selected tab. So when I push tab, the logic follows in update to say that, oh, did we press that shoot button? Which in this case right now is tab. If we have set the projectile, if we haven't set the projectile, the console will say, oh, no projectile to shoot. And then it should just jump out of this. Let's move this out like this and then hit break. And nope, can't break. Ooh, else. we're gonna, if we have set a projectile, then we'll instantiate. But if we haven't, then we're not gonna instantiate anything because then we'll just throw an error. So if we press the shoot button and we have set the projectile, then we're gonna call this instantiation function that's gonna launch the projectile at our shoot point at the position that we're facing. So let's look at this thing, these last two parts. We're going to be instantiating the projectile prefab, and this second parameter is saying shoot point position. We have our character here, and if we hit this little triangle, you'll notice that there's going to be a child associated with our object, and that's our bullet spawn point. We have a little icon here that represents where that spot is, and what that does is it has its own transform and its own position. And since it's a child object of our skelly, wherever we move our skelly, you'll notice that that little point here follows along in the relative spot of our skelly. Even if we flip it, let's flip this 180, you'll notice that that spot goes to the other side, just like wherever the skeleton's facing. And so whether we look left or right, that spawn point is going to be relatively in front of our character. And that's great because then we can shoot left or right. And so in our code, it's saying let's put that bullet where that shoot point is, right there, and we want it to face or use the rotation of our character. Right now this is transform rotation, and of course this script is attached to our main character. So that's telling the bullet that whatever facing direction that our character is, we also want our bullet to face that way. So let's go ahead and try that. Last thing that we want to do before I hit play is you'll notice that my shoot projectile has these parameters there. And for the projectile, I always want to be pulling my prefabs from the assets folder and not from the scene. If we're pulling an object over here and putting it into our prefabs parameter here, we're only going to have one object to use. And if we use from the prefabs folder, we pull in this object here, we won't have any problems. This is the proper way to do that. From there, we have that shoot point, and I've set our bullet spawn point to be this shoot point here. So it knows that it's going to throw the bullet here when we instantiate it, and it's going to be moving. So let's try that. My key is tab. I'm going to hit tab now. Ooh, let's see. Did I hit tab? Oh, what's going on? Why is it not shooting? Let's check. Maybe I have my logic off. Let's go back over here. If bullet is not, oops, if the bullet is null, let's set it like that. There's my bullet, and it's facing that way. Bring up the scale so we can see it. There's a bullet, it's flying that direction. If I look to the left, then they are mirrored on that side and then moving that way. Great, so that's what we're looking for. One last thing before we sign off here is the thing about namespaces. And so there's always going to be a possibility that when you work in large groups that someone might accidentally write their own script and call the same name as shoot projectile. And Unity is ultimately going to throw an error. One way to solve that is because maybe you wrote a script called shoot projectile and I'm asking you to import a project that has a shoot projectile script, the same name as yours. One way to go about that is to wrap your code in a different namespace. And you'll notice that all of my code that you just imported belongs to a certain namespace. And it follows this syntax. It has namespace and then a certain name with the first letter, the first character has to be a letter. And then you have squiggly bracket after the name and then terminating squiggly bracket here. And so this set encapsulates everything within the class. And what that tells Unity is everything in here belongs to MAGD 272 namespace. And if you wanted to have your personal scripts interact with jump demo, maybe you want to see how many jumps I have. You can't just reference the jump demo. you will ultimately have to write a new script, or you adapt your script to incorporate the words using MAGD 272 demo, just like we do over here. Remember, since the start of the semester, I said someone else has written some code, and we're going to be accessing that code. We are using the using keyword and then referencing the library or the namespace. Now, if you want to be using or referencing some of my code, let's say on a separate script, that particular separate script needs to have a using MAGD 272 demo if you are trying to access some of my properties. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, please ask me on the Discord. I'm going to be uploading the next set of videos fairly quickly, and please let's interact on Discord, and we'll answer any questions that you have. Hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.